We're going to have a chance to win a few prizes here again tonight. The first question I'm going to ask you, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here, though. I want you to name two of the families that Pigeon River supported in their harvest offering that work under RI. There was 4 different families that you guys supported in your harvest offering. I want you to name 2 of them. Mike knows. Dave knows.
Can I guess?
You can go.
Tom and Candace Mast and Scott and Crystal Miller.
You got it. Good. You didn't collect your prize from last time, but that's great. Very, very good. So Tom and Candace in Thailand, and Scott and Crystal in church planting in Morgantown. And the other 2 are Jeffrey and Rachel Everly and John and Sarah Zook. Jeffrey and Rachel are in Turkey, and John and Sarah in Morocco. So, good answer, Phyllis. You saved the honor of your congregation. We had a really good, I'll just chat for a second before I ask another question. We had a really nice time when Dale and Phyllis accompanied 3 of the other staff people to some meetings that we had in Bangkok. And they were not only able to meet the missionaries that worked there, but also meet a couple of ministry partners that came in from Bangladesh and from Laos. And we just really, really enjoyed, and having him and having them come in and participate in that. All right, so we talked about last night different regions of the world and, where people fit in the guilt, innocence, the shame, honor, the fear, power. There's about 8 billion people in the world. The most unreached part is the honor, shame cultures of the world. So how many of the 8 billion people of the world live in that section of the world?
4.5 million.
That's very good.
4.51.
I think my chart said 4.37, but 4.5 is close enough. The chart is a little bit old because the book was written a few years ago, and the world population is growing. So the 4.37 is probably grown to 4.5. Or you can turn them in for a better prize. That's very good. So, all right, I'll ask you a harder question here then. This one gets a little bit trickier. Mike did a sermon on the elements. What passage of Scripture did that sermon come out of? Bill had his hand up first. The pastor.
You can give it to somebody else, but can I answer?
Yeah, tell me the answer.
Acts
Acts
chapter
chapter
2. You know,
Start.
Versus what?
I want to say 42, but I'm not.
You were correct. It was Acts 2:42 and following. That is a correct answer. He gets 2 magnets. Okay, so last night I did sections from the Psalm. Let's see if somebody can name which Psalm was the one that was for fear and power. Which Psalm did we read last night that was for fear and power? You can't do that?
I can name off your Psalm, but I forget which one was it.
The one that was for guilt, innocence, I think is very well known because it's the one that's David's confession after he sins with Bathsheba. And I think most people would know that one. All right, so I'm getting too picky here. We have to come up with an easier question.
He doesn't know.
Psalm 59 was the one for fear, power, and Psalm 89 was the one that's honor, shame that we read from. And by the way, just if you guys ever want to do something else to just look at a New Testament passage, read 1 Peter chapter 2, starting at verse 3 or 4, and going for the next 10 verses. When you ever want to look at something and see how honor shame is really laid out in a passage. And that's the whole thing about Peter talking about, the priesthood of all believers and that you're a holy nation and all of those things. But you read through that passage in your own time, you will really see how these themes kind of show up in passages when you're looking for them. And the whole book of 1 Peter really is written to a people that are dealing with that very issue. Should I go back to, let's go back to something Mike shared on Sunday morning. There was a specific time of life where the tribe where he was working had a ceremony that was kind of a pagan ceremony that the Christians converted to something that was much more Christian. What time of life was it when this ceremony took place? Right here. Absolutely. Very good. And there's also other times when people go through oftentimes boys get circumcised at about 12 or 13, and some of that's pretty pagan too. But anyway, that's not what Mike talked about on Sunday. Back to Mike.
Thank you, Jerry. If I talked about everything that happened in Africa, we'd be here like a month.
I did want to also just make I forgot to say this earlier, but we just received your check and just processed it from your harvest offering this week. And we just really do want to extend our deep gratitude for the way that you participate with our mission agency and the generosity of your congregation. I mean, this is just a phenomenal giving congregation, and we greatly, greatly appreciate your partnership.
Yeah, and thank you for everyone who's fed us. I now understand why you have this weight challenge thing going on in your church. Because, wow, I need to go home, because if I stay up here, I'm going to gain weight. So, or have to start riding bike with Dale or something, I don't know. But yeah, thank you so much for everyone who's fed us and taken care of us. We really appreciate it. So like Dave said, tonight I want it to be just kind of pull back and just be really practical. I mean, we talked a little bit about that in the Element series and even on Sunday morning. And so we're actually going to watch a video by the Skit guys. It's a real life story. It actually happened. And at the end of it, I want to add some pieces that I just know from getting to know those guys and having coffee with them and hanging out with them in some different settings. And part of why I want to do that is I think sometimes people, we get up front and you're like, oh, I can't be like those guys. You know, they're the pastor, they're the missionary, they have all these degrees. I don't have a single degree. I don't. My journey has looked very different. I was an electrician. I ran from my calling to ministry. I was like Jonah. I went back into ministry. By the time I was in ministry, we were married. We already had the third kid on the way. We soon had 5 kids. I didn't have time to go back to school. I was just trying to put food on my table. I worked in ministry first, also working in hospitals in different settings. I was in ministry 10 years before I ever became full-time. I've taken some classes here and there, but to this day, I still don't even have a bachelor's degree. So I say all that because everybody has a different journey, and my point is that God uses us if we're willing to be used. And so I don't want you to think here, oh, Mike's done all this. I'm just a guy that said yes. And I've done some crazy things in my life, and I've seen some crazy things happen, but it's simply because I was willing to be used and said yes. And I believe that every single one of us in the church can say yes and be used. I think education is great. I'm not against education. I wish I had some more education. I wish I had some of the knowledge that Jerry and Bill and Dave have. And I listen to these guys going, wow, they're so smart. I wish I was that smart. But I know that God has used me exactly the way that he's supposed to use me. And so I just say all that. So don't think because we're here talking about these stories that you can't be a part of that journey. Because if you say yes to God, he will just use you to do crazy things. And again, I literally could probably spend a month up here just talking about different things that has happened through my years in ministry, both in the United States and in Africa, miracles and just amazing things that have happened simply because we were vessels that said yes. And that's kind of the point of this video tonight is seeing just how simply we really can be on mission with God. And so we're going to watch this video, and then we're going to look in Ephesians 2 a little bit. So if you guys are ready, go ahead. I learned some dances in Africa. I could do some of those. They look kind of funny, but anyway. So while they're trying to get this video to play, I'll just share a little bit then about the video. So the lady that we're going to hear about, it's a story of how she just took somebody under wing. It was somebody in their school that had some disabilities and just had challenges, and she reached out to this person. She loved on this person. So you're seeing the video, but his name is Dennis, is who the person is. But this young lady that they're talking about, she actually led the skit guys to the Lord. Eddie and I forget the other guy's name at the moment. Tommy and Eddie. She led them both to the Lord. They became kind of this threesome, and they did some amazing things. And when you just
in my last year of high school, I met this girl. Her name was Stacy. Stacy was a believer. She realized that, we love God and we love others. And that was her mission. That's what she did. She loved God and she loved others. Where I would be afraid. In my last year of high school, I met this girl. Her name was Stacy. Stacy was a believer. She realized that, we love God and we love others. And that was her mission. That's what she did. She loved God and she loved others. Where I would be afraid and I would look at how she would intermingle with everybody and share Jesus with people, I just thought that was like, God, I don't get that. How can she just go out there and do that? But she would do that. So I want to tell you a story about Stacy and a guy in our class, in our school, named Dennis.
Hi, my name is Dennis, and it's okay if you laugh, I'm used to it. I'm supposed to tell you my story, so it goes something like this. I was at school, one day, and at my locker, and I dropped my books, right? And that's probably not a big deal to you, but to me, it's a whole production to try and pick them back up, So I'm standing there in the hallway trying to use the force, And the force was not with me, And all of a sudden, this pretty blonde-haired girl walks up, and she says, "Hey, my name's Stacy. Can I help you?" And I was like, "How about you do that?" Yeah. So Stacy picked up my books, and she said, "Hey, how about I carry these to your class?" And I was like, who am I to keep a pretty girl from doing her good deed of the day, So she carried my books to class, and the whole time she just talk, And we got to my class, and she set my books on my desk, and she said, "Dennis, I'm so sorry. I didn't even let you get a word in edgewise." And I was like, "It is okay, And then she just kind of stopped, and she looked at me, and she said, "Hey," she said, "I got a great idea." She said, "Me and some of my friends are going roller skating tomorrow night. Why don't you join us?" And I was like, yeah, I don't do so well on wheels, And I barely do okay on feet, And she said, "It's okay, I will help you." I said, "Okay," So that next day, Stacy came and picked me up and took me to the skating rink. I don't know who was more scared, me or the guy I handed my money to and said, "Size 9.5, please." Stacy helped me get my skates on, and for a while I just sat over to the side, but it felt so good just to be included, And then Stacy skated over and she said, "Hey, Dennis, come on out and skate." And I was like, no, I'm good. And she said, "No, come on." I was like, "No, it's cool." She said, "Come on, I will help you." I said, "Okay." So Stacy helped me out to the skating rink. You should have seen everybody's eyes. They were like, "What?" I just looked at them and I was like, "It's cool, I'm a professional skater, We got out on the skating rink, and this leg went that way and this leg went that way. But with Stacy's help, I made it around the skating rink twice. It was fantastic, after we'd finished skating, Stacy was dropping me off at my house. And she said, hey, Dennis, I've got another great idea. She said, tomorrow night, my family is having a cookout and going swimming. Why don't you join us? And I was like, you see this body? It don't float, you know? And she just smiled and she said, it's okay, I will help you. I said, okay, you know? So that next day, my mom took me to the store and bought me a swimsuit and dropped me off at Stacy's house. It was so great just to feel the sun on my body, you know? And Stacy was in the pool, I was sitting on the edge, and she said, Dennis, why don't you hop in the water? And I was like, no, I'm good. She said, no, come on. I was like, no, it's okay. She said, it's okay, I will help you. I said, okay. So Stacy helped me down into the shallow end of the pool, and I was like, She said, no, come in the deep end. And I was like, no, I'm good, you know. She said, no, come on. I was like, no. She said, come on, I will. And I stopped her and I went, I know, you will help me, you know. And she just smiled, you know, and she said, I will if you'll let me, you know. I said, okay. And so Stacy held out her arms and helped me float in the deep end. It was fantastic, you know. After we'd finished swimming, we were eating hamburgers and Stacy was telling me about all of her dreams and plans. And I'll tell you right now, that girl could change the world, you know. And then she stopped and she just looked at me and she said, hey, Dennis. She said, tell me about your dreams. And I said, I don't really have any. She said, come on, everybody has dreams. I was like, nope, not me. And she kept persisting, and finally I just got frustrated with her. So I looked at her and I said, okay, Stacy. She said, you want to know my dreams? I'll tell you my dreams. I said, in my dreams, this old leg is straight, just like everybody else's. And I said, in my dream, this old hip is right in place, just like everybody else's. And I can run and jump, no problem. And I said, in my dreams, these old crippled hands are no longer crippled. And if I drop my books, I just bend down and pick up my books, no problem. And I said, in my dreams, I don't need these old glasses to see anymore. I said, in my dreams, my mouth is normal, just like everybody else's. And in my dreams, I don't look different than anyone else. And in my dreams, nobody talks about me behind my back or makes fun of me. In my dreams, I'm normal. In my dreams, I don't hate what I see in the mirror. But then, I always realize it's just a dream. We sat there in silence, much like this, for what seemed like an eternity. And then I'll never forget what Stacy said that day. She looked me square in the eye. She said, Dennis, that's the dumbest dream I've ever heard. I was like, well, you sure know how to make a cripple guy feel good. She shook her head and she looked at me and she said, no, Dennis. She said, look, God does not look on the outward appearance, right? She looked at me and she said, Dennis, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. I looked at her and I said, no, Stacy, I'm a joke. She just shook her head at me. She said, oh, Dennis. She said, you are so busy looking on the outside. She said, God doesn't look on the outside. He looks at the heart. And she said, you've got a great heart, Dennis. She was right. I guess it was probably like 2 or 3 weeks later, Stacy came by my locker. She said, hey, Dennis, I got another great idea. I was like, oh boy. She said, why don't you join me at my church tonight? And I was like, surprise. But I went to Stacy's church. And Stacy's God, who looks at the heart, became my God, who looks at the heart. I know the truth. I know some of you, just like I used to, you hate what you see in the mirror. My failings are obvious. Some of you, yours are hidden. But you know what? There is a God who looks at the heart. And I said, Stacy, how can he just look at my heart and not see all my failings? And she said, it's called grace. And I remember they sang this song that night. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see. Thank you.
So that's one of my all-time favorite videos the Skit Guys have ever done. And I don't remember if it was that particular youth conference or if it was a different one, but they told the rest of the story about Stacy, and you might have picked up on it a little bit in there. He kept talking about her in the past tense. And so Stacy was this girl in their school who just invited people to be a part of something bigger. And if you guys remember on Sunday, I said, I think when you do the first things well, multiplication comes natural. And I also said, when it comes to community, the greatest thing we have to offer people is relationship. And what I meant by that is that people come in these doors, people come to church because of the relationships that you have with them, because you've invested in them, because you've loved on them, because you've shown they have worth and value. And then you say, hey, why don't you come with me? Because a lot of people have been hurt by church. A lot of people have had things happen in church, and so they're scared. They're scared to go to church. They're scared what that may look like. But when there's a friendship, when there's a relationship, and they know that they can trust you, they're going to come in those doors. And so that's what I meant by those two things. And so Stacy had been accepted to the same college that Tommy and Eddie had been accepted to. It was in Texas. They were going to go to school together. And about 2 weeks before college was supposed to start, she was driving home from work, and she was hit by a drunk driver and killed instantly. She was taken home. Her race was finished. And so they really have no idea what Stacy may have done. But they do that skit not just to honor Dennis, but to honor Stacy, because she did her race faithfully while she was here. And she did everything that she was asked to, and she just loved on people. And if you've never heard of the Skit Guys, they have some phenomenal skits out there. They have tons of skits. These guys have been doing ministry. They've been doing skits for almost 30 plus years now, because some girl in high school loved on them and invested in them and witnessed to them, and they became Christians. And so I share all that because I think a lot of us are like Dennis, right? Whether it's guilt or innocence, whether it's shame, honor, whether it's fear or power, there are things inside of us that we say, I can't do that. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I can't speak right. I don't have, we make this list of excuses of why we can't be part of God's plan. And like I said, I don't have a lot of the titles, and that's fine. There's things that I'm actually not that good of a speaker. I generally talk way too fast, and man, I have messed up some major words. There's some that I can't even tell you as examples because it's so embarrassing, the word I was trying to say and what came out of my mouth, that I don't want to repeat it in church. In fact, the very first time I ever preached was one of those. I had never preached before, and I was so excited, and I was so fast, and I was go, 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 and this word came out, and I realized exactly what I said, and I just kept going, and I noticed like 2 or 3 people in the congregation were laughing, and they had caught it too, and I just ignored it. I just kept going, right? But in all of that, again, I was 28 years old before I finally figured this thing out. And I'm still learning what it means every day. But I'd grown up in church. I'd went to a Christian school. I had been in ministry for multiple years at this point in time. I was married. We had 4 kids with the 5th on the way. And I finally got it that all God wanted was me. And at 28 years old, I was working full-time at a hospital. I was working full-time at a church. It was the mega church I told you about where we created the Element series. I was burning out. I knew that something had to change. I went to the church, and I said, hey, you guys said you're going to make me full-time. They're like, dude, the economy's bad. The market just crashed. You got way too many kids. We can't afford your health insurance. I mean, literally, that's what they told me. They said, we're never going to put you full-time. You have too many kids. This is a mega church, by the way. I was like, okay. And so I just said, will you release me then to look for something else? Because I said, I can't keep doing this. I either need to work full-time at the hospital or do something different. And they did. They said, yeah, we'll release you. And I just remember, it was around Christmas time, just remember on my knees in my bedroom with my wife just saying, God, our life is yours. Our marriage is yours. Our family is yours. Our kids are yours. Just use us. And within the next year, we moved to Pennsylvania, which again is a story in and of itself. We actually moved to Pennsylvania sight unseen on where we were going to live. We got hired by this church. We were packing up our moving truck. We still did not have a place to live in Pennsylvania. The pastor of the church called us up and said, we found you guys an apartment. We said, great, we're packed up. We're leaving tomorrow. We had never seen this apartment. We didn't know anything about it. We just trusted God. We trusted this church. They spent the whole next day painting it and cleaning it. We drove through a snowstorm to get there, and I thought, my goodness, what have we done? It's snowing in November in Pennsylvania. We've done something terribly wrong. And we arrived there, and it was the best church we've ever worked at, and just amazing things happened. But again, it was just that surrendering and saying, God, use us. And I say that not to say, wow, I figured something out, but I did. I figured out that God just wants us. He just wants us to be willing to be used. And I encourage you, don't say that prayer unless you mean it, because he will use you. And in our story, we went from Pennsylvania to West Africa to Missouri, back to Ohio, and you may stay in Pigeon your whole life. Again, that was my story. That's our story. But if you say, God, use me, I promise you, he will use you. And why can I say that? Why can I say that with full faith? And it's not just because of my life. It's not just because of the example of my life, but it's right here in Ephesians. And if you have your Bibles with you, or a Kindle or tablet or phone or whatever you use, turn to Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2 is probably one of my favorite passages. You can see almost all 3 of what we've been talking about in this passage: guilt and innocence, shame and honor, even fear and power. I remember it was a couple years after I moved to PA. It was 2010, and we were at a student life missions camp, ironically in Lynchburg, Virginia, and we were at Liberty, and we were serving the community. And David Nasser was our speaker, and he's preached from this passage. And I love that. You know, here's this Iranian guy who came over during the Iranian war, was a Muslim. Senior year came to become a Christian. Through that, his whole family are now Christians. And he was preaching from this passage. He said, and he was talking about how it took a long time for him to figure out that, you know, verse 1 says, and you were dead in your trespasses and sin in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air. The Spirit is now at work in the sons of disobedience. And he goes, for him, he understood that. He was dead. He got it. Like, before Jesus, he was dead. But he said he was studying that with his wife, it's like the light bulb went on that she goes, oh, man. Even though I grew up in a Christian home, even though I grew up in a Christian school, like, without Jesus, I was dead too. And again, that just kind of hit me in that time, because I realized, and again, we're going to walk through the rest of this passage, but I realized in that moment that for so many years of my life, I had never really realized that I was dead without Jesus. I thought I was good enough, right? I mean, I went to Christian school. I had these verses memorized. I had good parents. Like, I was okay. And I was almost 30 years old, and it was like, oh my, I was dead. Until Jesus became a part of my life, I was dead. And I love that. He just had some fun with that. He's like, dead is dead. In Latin, it's dead. In Greek, it's dead. In Hebrew, it's dead. There's not half dead. There's not kind of dead. There's not sort of dead. You're just dead. And I was just like, it's so simple. But again, I grew up with this idea that I didn't really need Jesus because I had all these credentials, so to speak. And so again, this was just part of that journey of saying, it started with 2 years before that, saying, God, use me, and then recognizing, like, man, Jesus, you really did make me into this new creation. You really did make me this new person. Without you, I am nothing. And when that clicked, all I wanted to do was tell people about Jesus. Because and this sounds really morbid, and I don't want it to, but I began to see people as dead people. And I'm not trying to quote the weird movie, The Sixth Sense, right? I literally began to see people as without Jesus, they're dead. They have no hope. They have nothing to live for. And so I didn't care anymore. Like, I wanted to tell people who he was. And I did that through building relationships, talking about sports, talking about Star Wars, playing board games, whatever it needed to be, right? I had fun at dinner geeking out on Star Wars, man. And I didn't think you were dead, by the way. But I mean, just whatever people were interested in, I wanted to be a part of that. And then one of the things I learned, I think I would have been a really good salesman probably. Like, I learned that generally what people wear is what they like, right? So Bill wore an Orioles shirt the other day. He clearly is an Orioles fan, right? He had a 49ers shirt on the other day that he kept hiding from all of you guys. He's clearly a 49ers fan. You can generally tell what people like by what they wear. So I paid attention to their hats. I paid attention to their T-shirts. I paid attention to their sweatshirts. You almost always know where people have vacationed, because 90% of the time their sweatshirts is where they vacationed, right? Because we go places and we buy T-shirts, or we buy sweatshirts, or we buy hats, or we buy coffee mugs. And so just by these little things, I would just starting conversations with people, ask people what's going on. And they'd be like, how'd you know that? It's like, well, you have this massive shirt on that says, I love the 49ers. It's like, whatever. But I just started seeing people, that hopelessness that was in life. And again, we're not going to spend the whole time through Ephesians 2. I mean, that's a sermon in and of itself. You could spend several days, probably several Sundays there. But I want to go all the way back to the end of it. We'll just read verse 8, but we're going to really spend our last little few minutes we have on verse 10. Verse 8 says, for by grace you have been saved through faith. Right, so the guilt, innocence thing. This is not your own doing, is a gift from God. And again, for me, I had to recognize that it wasn't nothing I ever did. Because again, somehow in my head, growing up in church, growing up and all that, I still had thought it was something I did. And we talk about that honor-shame culture that Jerry's talked about for the last 2 sessions. Man, the hardest thing for a Muslim person to get through their head is there's nothing they can do. Because their whole culture is based on honor and shame. And it's honoring, and it's doing the right thing, and they pay these alms, and they give those stuff. And so when you tell them, hey, look, there's nothing you did, it's a gift, like they just can't do it. It doesn't make sense to them. It's like, what do you mean there's nothing I do? What do you mean it's a gift? Like, no, I have to do something. I have to have honor. So again, looking at it from that lens, but it's just, I did nothing. I got this gift. Again, going on in verse 9, not as a result of works, so that no one may boast. Right? And so when I start off sharing my story, like, I can't boast about this stuff. It's been a God thing. And I'm just along for the ride. Like I put on the seatbelt on the roller coaster and I said, God, I'm in. And we've had a fun ride. And my wife would say all the time, we would share stories, we'd write our newsletters, we'd talk on things. And people would say, how'd you do that? And my wife, her favorite response is, God did it? Like I didn't do it, God did. And people would get mad at her. They're like, but what do you mean? How'd you do it? She's like, no, really, like God did it. Like, she's like, I don't know how I did it. Like God just did it. But that's what Scripture says, right? It's this gift. So none of us can boast. We can't work. And that honor-shame culture struggles with that. What do you mean I can't work? What do you mean I can't earn it? And I think, honestly, in the West, we struggle with that a little bit, too. I think there's a lot of Americans that, if we're honest, struggle with that. We are hard workers. We've been taught to work from the time we were little, and you want to work and prove yourself. And yet God says, I don't need you to do that. I just need you to say yes. And this last verse here, and it ties into what we just watched. It ties in the video, and it ties into, I think, why all of us can be on this life of mission. He says, for we are his workmanship. I'm reading from the ESV. You might have masterpiece in your Bible. You might have craftsmanship, depending on what translation you have. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Just think about that for a second. Each one of you in this room is a masterpiece. You are created by God, for God. What? For these good works which he prepared beforehand, should you walk in them. So when you say, I can't, God's like, I already created it for you. When before Genesis 1 happened and there was nothing and it was void, and I said, let there be light, I had already planned this whole thing. I knew exactly where you were going to live and exactly what date and what time, and I knew who was going to walk into your life, and I gave you exactly what you needed because you're my masterpiece. If you simply walk in these good works, I've prepared you exactly for what you needed. It's right there in Scripture. All of us are masterpieces. And the God of the universe who spits stars out of his mouth, who keeps everything perfect, who knows where all the snow is. I mean, just like read through those couple passages in Job. It's amazing. He created each one of us. He knows how many hairs are on our head. He knows our tics. He knows our likes. He knows our dislikes. He knows our personalities because he knit us together in our mother's womb. And he said, I created these good works for you. I just simply need you to walk in them. And that's why I believe anyone in the church can be missional. Because whatever situation that God puts you in, whatever situation arises, he's already prepared you for it, whether you realize it or not. Because he created you for it. And so in that moment, the best thing to do is say, Lord, I have no idea what to do, but you've prepared me. You've created me, and so, Lord, I'm asking you to help me. And he does. He absolutely does. When I went over to Africa, our official title was to disciple the church leaders and to model marriage and family life. We were the first family that had ever shown up there. We were the first, well, I shouldn't say they're the first married couple. There was a married couple before us for about 6 months. We were the first long-term married couple. We were the first family for sure, the first people with kids. They didn't actually believe we had 5 kids. They actually thought white people could only have 2 kids because that's what they had seen in movies and television. And so they literally thought we brought some of my brother's kids with me. And we're like, no, these are all ours. We took us a while to convince them they were all ours. And so we did. We modeled marriage and we modeled family life. One of the first questions I got once I could understand language was, why don't you beat your wife? Never thought I'd get that question. They didn't prepare me for that in missionary school. Why don't I beat my wife? Because I like her? I mean, again, that's not how I answered. But, but it was so cool that the different questions were just, God had prepared us to answer them. But the number one thing that I ended up doing over there, of all those things, of all those assignments, and I think I mentioned it earlier, if not, before going back into ministry, I was an electrician. And so I had just gotten my journeyman's, and my goal was to get my master's. My goal was to be the youngest guy to ever get his master's in the state of Indiana, and I wanted to run my own company, and I wanted to be rich. That was my goal. And I was on my way. And I was a good electrician. I was good at what I did. I was good at figuring out problems. It made sense to me. It clicked. It made sense in my head. And ironically, the number one thing that I did in Africa was wire solar panels. Almost on a weekly basis. And so 10, 15 years prior, God had been preparing me, having an amazing journeyman who taught me how to be an electrician, preparing me to wire things and make sense. And we didn't do new homes, the guy I worked with. We did the funky stuff. So actually, in 2002, 2003, I was actually working on solar panels at a landfill in Fort Wayne, Indiana, that was military technology that they had bought, because you couldn't even get solar panels to the general public the way we were working on. So again, I'm in Africa in 2013, so 11 years prior to that, I'm wiring the same exact solar panels that I ended up wiring in Africa. God prepared me. He prepared exactly what I'd need. And that was the biggest thing I did. There was a couple years in a row that the cashew season, everyone wanted a solar panel because they wanted some light in their house. So they got solar panels, they got batteries, they got a couple lights, generally one in the living room, one on the porch. Because when we first moved to Kitzel, there was no lights ever. It was dark. By the time we left, like every house had at least one light. And I just wired solar panels. I went to villages, I went to remote villages, I went all over the place. I took my little tools on my motorcycle and I was paid in goats, I was paid in chickens, I was paid in bunches of bananas, I was paid in good food, I was paid in nasty food, all kinds of different, I always said, please, I don't want anything, but some people just insisted. But every single time I went and wired a solar panel, I'd talk about how Jesus brought light. Because I spoke Creole, I could speak the language, and so I'd use it as a witnessing tool. And so again, I say all that every season of my life, I have realized that God has prepared me exactly for that season. And even the season at RI, I've told Jerry this, I never thought I'd be working at RI. Honestly, it's my dream job. If you could have asked Mike 10 years ago, my dream job would be what I do. And I love going to churches in our network. I love spending time with you guys. I love seeing communities. I love seeing what's going on. I love encouraging. I love giving tools. I love the fact that I get to leave and don't have to worry about the headaches. No, just playing. But I love what I do. And I told Jerry, I have served as a youth pastor, I've served on the mission field, and I served as a senior pastor. And so I don't relate to everything, but I generally understand what you guys are walking through, because I've been there. I've been in those meetings. I've been in those situations. I've been by those people's bedsides. I've been in those counseling appointments. I literally understand, and I think that God perfectly equipped me for what I do at RI, and I absolutely love what I do at RI. I love it. The only thing I wish is that my wife could come with me on every trip. That's about the only thing that's a downer, but, she can't. And so I say all that to say, no matter who you are, no matter what age you are, God has called us to be on mission, and He's equipped you for whatever's next. Whether it's a conversation at Walmart, well, I guess you don't have Walmart. If it's a conversation at Meijer, if it's a conversation at the gas station, it's a conversation in the community, I guarantee you, he's prepared. He says in Scriptures, I prepared these good works for you should you walk in them. And so we need to not be like Dennis and see ourselves as junk or not good enough or not equipped. And we need to see us for what Ephesians says, that we are masterpieces, that we were created for this, and that God has prepared you in advance for what He's going to ask you to do. And again, in that moment, if you're not sure, go to prayer. Simply ask Him, Lord, what do I do right now? Because I don't always have the answers, as you don't always have the answers, but I know the one that does always have the answers, and He always comes through. Sometimes He takes longer than I would like, but He always comes through, and He always answers. And so I want to leave you with that encouragement. And again, we've talked a little bit about Burl Forrester, and if you didn't pick up on it, here's a man at 60 years old that sold everything, moved to Senegal, West Africa, or Gambia, West Africa, served in Gambia, served in Senegal, served in Guinea-Bissau, spent the next 20 years of his life planting churches. And everywhere he went, he had been a fruit farmer before. Everywhere he went, he planted orchards. There are little orange orchards in all these different places that Burl was at. That's kind of his in. God had prepared him for that. And he planted churches for the next 20 years of his life. So if you're like, hey, I'm too old. No, No, you're not. Now, maybe you're not going to go to Africa. But no matter what age you are in this room, God has something for you. And so Dave ended our time last night. He said, okay, now how do we do it in our culture? How do we do it in Michigan, right? And Tom Beachy asked the question, why are we not training up people in our own culture? Which we are. We are training up local leaders. And local leaders have they grow churches and do things much faster than missionaries. But we still have to train them and disciple them and do these different things until they're ready to go, and then we let them go. And Dave said, how do we do that here? What does that look like here? And I feel like that the video and this Ephesians 2 is exactly beginning to answer those questions. What does God have for you here? What does God have for Pigeon? Because he's already prepared it. If you've been fighting something in your heart, it's because he's wanting you to do it. The people that he's going to bring into your life are already the people he's prepared. It's simply you saying, yes, Lord, use me. And he will do amazing things in this community because he's already set them up for you to do them. And so that's the encouragement that I want to leave with you guys as Jerry and I prepared to head home, that anyone can honestly do this simply by letting God in and do it through him. It doesn't take any special skill. It doesn't take any crazy things. It's just simply saying yes. And the Bible tells us he has prepared you for what that will look like. So I'm going to stop there. I do want to ask if anyone has any questions. It doesn't even have to be about tonight. It could be about other sessions. We have a few minutes here. And if it's a question for Jerry, that's fine too. But we just want to at least allow an opportunity for maybe some questions or something that you didn't quite understand or you want clarification on. And if you don't have any questions, then we'll move forward. All right, no questions. I believe, Phyllis, it's up to you to take us home.
Please stand and turn to number 402. Christian, let your burning light shine on all we cluster bright. Let your words and deeds be pure. All for Christ you must endure. Christian, let your light shine all along your way. You may guide a wanderer to eternal day. You may save from endless night if you let your lamp burn bright. As you journey, hear ye ho, shed away wherever you go. Find in this your pure delight. Let your light shine clear and bright. Christian, let your light shine all along your way. You may guide a wanderer to eternal day. You may save from endless night if you let your lamp burn bright. That your light may guide you through. Brightly let it shine anew. Keep up courage, never fail, till you're safe within the veil. Christian, let your light shine all along your way. You may guide a wanderer to eternal day. You may save from endless night if you let your lamp burn bright.
Please may stand for benediction. Mike and Jerry, I just want to thank you so much for taking some time to be with us this week, for giving us a little more insight into the work of RI around the world. to challenge us with some tools to be able to understand in a different way the work that we're called to and the culture that we're part of, the cultures around the world, and also ultimately to send us forth because we are all equipped. We have what we need. The question is, will we answer with a yes for the call that we receive? And so with that, I want to offer this refrain one more time from the hymn that we just sang as our benediction. Christian, let your light shine all along your way. You might guide a wanderer to eternal day. You may save from endless night if you let your lamp burn bright. Go forth shining your light. Go forth in Christ's peace. Amen.